Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sergeant Kevin Allen with the Portland Police Bureau, and I'm hosting today's media availability. We're going to hear from Mayor Ted Wheeler and then Chief Chuck Lavelle. Both will be providing statements to you, and then we'll open it up for some questions at the end. Today, we'll be using the raise hand feature on Zoom. If you haven't used that before, let us know in the chat, and we'll help you find it. I'll call on those who have raised their hand in order, and then our call manager will invite you to unmute. At that point, you can open up your microphone and ask your question of the mayor or the chief. I know that we have a lot of journalists with us today, understandably so. So just a fair warning, we may not have a chance to get to everyone with the time we have available, but we'll certainly do our best. So with that, I will open it up to Mayor Wheeler.
Thank you. First of all, thank you everybody for joining us today. What happened early this morning is devastating. It's tragic and it's senseless. Anytime lives are lost or people are injured because of gun violence, I feel myself feeling heartbroken, but at the same time, angry. My thoughts and prayers are with the victims and families, not just of the shooting that happened downtown this morning, but also with anyone who has ever experienced the pain and the trauma that gun violence brings. But I have to say this, thoughts and prayers aren't enough. What's needed is clarity in terms of what resources the Portland Police Bureau needs in the years ahead to address the changing safety needs in our community. That includes clearly identifying the tools, the training, and the appropriate number of personnel. I will work with my colleagues on the City Council and the Chief to clarify those needs specifically. At the same time, I'm hearing from the public loudly and clearly that while they want a safe community, they also want a bureau that's accountable to the public which it serves. I will use the remainder of my time as mayor fighting hard to ensure both adequate public safety resources and work hard to increase trust between the police bureau and the community. We as a community need to make sure that we invest in intervention, in prevention, and accountability for those responsible for this ongoing gun violence. There were multiple incidents of gun violence in just the last 24 hours. In addition to the death of one person downtown, another person was fatally shot in the Park Rose neighborhood. Two other shootings were reported as well, one in North Portland and another near Southeast 80th and Foster Road. Our city's Office of Violence Prevention has been engaged, doing outreach and offering support to families and friends of those hurt and killed since this morning's shootings happened. They're also working with our community-based organization partner, POIC, Healing Hurt People, hospital-based program, who've responded as well, offering comfort and assistance to the victims and their families. My office has also been in close contact with the Portland Police Bureau. I want to thank their investigators in particular, as well as members of the Enhanced Community Safety Team, who are already working tirelessly to learn the facts around and the truth about what happened. We obviously don't know everything right now because it takes time to work through all that's needed to get answers. What we do know is that each time gun violence is committed, somebody's loved one is hurt or will not return home. Someone will not be able to hug and hold their child, their family member, or their friend. Public safety remains a top priority for me. And as the city continues to reopen, as people are beginning to enjoy themselves in every neighborhood, not just in the downtown area, our goal and mission continues to be making sure that we can do so safely and peacefully. I'll now turn this over to Chief Lavelle for his thoughts. Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to extend my condolences to the families and loved ones of the two people who were killed this morning in separate shooting incidents. I also want to recognize those who are hurt. We had numerous people injured by gunfire, and that's unacceptable in our city. I know there have been a lot of questions about what happened downtown this morning, and I want everyone to know that we recognize the desire to know more. Our homicide unit has been on scene since the wee hours trying to piece it all together. I won't be able to provide a full picture of what happened right now, but here's what we do know. At 2:10 a.m., Central Precinct officers responded to a report of multiple people shot in the 300 block of Southwest 3rd Avenue. When officers arrived, they found an extremely chaotic scene with lots of injured people. Officers initiated life-saving measures to those who were hurt and secured the scene for paramedics to respond. I want to also thank Portland Fire and AMR for their response to aid the injured victims as well. 7 people were hurt, both male and female victims. Initially, we believe there were 8 people struck, but detectives have only confirmed 7. An 18-year-old woman was critically hurt, and we learned later this morning that she passed away at a hospital. The suspect or suspects left the scene before police were called, and no one's been arrested at this time. We understand that there's a desire to know more about what happened. I'm asking for those in the community who might have been there, might have been an eyewitness, might have been on the scene, might have video or anything of that nature that will help us determine what happened, to please come forward and contact detectives. We have experienced detectives who are out doing work right now to try to sort this all out. Any unverified information we release now may hamper the effort to arrest and prosecute the offender or offenders. We all want to know what happened and who did this and why, and I pledge that more information will come out as soon as possible. What we need now is help from the community. Investigators think there might be more victims and witnesses who left the scene, which is understandable under the circumstances, as chaotic and terrifying as that scene was. If anyone does have more information, Detective Brian Sims and Detective Scott Broughton are the primary investigators on this incident, and their contact info is in our press release. If anyone has video from before, during, or after the incident, please share that with us right away. Every little bit of information we can gather will help us. I want to say this is an extremely taxing morning for our personnel, including patrol officers who responded to calls and the detectives who are investigating. We had 4 significant shooting incidents in the span of about 4 hours, 2 of which are homicides. We had downtown shooting at 2:10, and then at 2:30, there was a report of a shooting in the 8,000 block of Southeast Foster Road. Officers believe someone may have been injured there. They searched the area with a police dog, but were unable to find any victims. And at about 6:30, we had 2 shooting calls in North Precinct at the same time. A man was killed in the call at the area of 113th and Northeast Sandy, and a woman suffered serious injuries after being shot in the 2100 block of North Willis Street. She's currently in the hospital right now. If you go back to yesterday, we've had 11 shooting incidents resulting in 13 people injured or killed, and that's in a span of 38 hours. Not only is this shocking, all of these calls really tax resources, both patrol and investigations. I want to extend my gratitude to all the officers, sergeants, detectives, criminalists, and others who worked on these calls. They're doing great work under really, really tough circumstances. It's sobering to see all the gun violence that we've been experiencing here in Portland. 2 homicides from this morning are expected to be our 50th and 51st homicides of the year. Most of those have been connected to gunfire, but they're all tragic. I can assure you that we're taking this extremely seriously. Officers are doing everything we can on our part to address this disturbing trend. We're glad to work with the larger community to find ways to keep people from resorting to this type of violence. And we're also looking at ways we can deploy additional resources to the downtown area from our surrounding precincts as well.
All right, thank you, Chief. We have time then for some questions. So if you have a question for the Chief or the Mayor, please do the raise hand feature, and it should pop up here on my screen, and I'll call on you. And our meeting moderator will invite you to unmute to ask your question. And then again, we ask you to mute for the answer so we get clean sound. The first person I have is Megan Allison. Go ahead, Megan, with your question.
If you guys can hear me, this is for Chief Lavelle. My question is, does the department have the resources to prevent gunfire at this scale from happening again?
You know, on an incident to incident basis, the resources, are very, very important. but it's hard to say if we had this many officers, we wouldn't have this type of thing. I feel like this type of thing could happen, but I also feel like we are under-resourced as a police department, as a city. We've had many years of growth as a city and a shrinking police department, frankly. I think, you can only go so long with that trend before you hit a tipping point.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Zane Sparling. Go ahead, Zane.
Thank you. My question is for Mayor Wheeler. You said earlier that you're looking for clarity about the sort of tools or resources. Obviously, there's been some cuts to the police bureau in this year and last year's budget. So when you're looking for clarity, does that mean you want to raise the budget? Do you want to bring back some of these gun violence teams? I think people might hear you asking for clarity and say you should have clarity at this point.
Zane, what we need is a plan. And the plan has to acknowledge that the public safety needs of this community are changing, and they're changing fairly rapidly. Let me just throw a statistic out there. The city of Detroit has approximately the same square miles as the city of Portland. It's about 145-ish. Their population is slightly larger than us. They have 2,200 police officers. We have between 800 and 900. And given the number of retirements that we're expecting just by virtue of the people reaching retirement age, given the difficulty of recruiting, my expectation under the current status quo is the Portland Police Bureau will continue to be less resourced rather than more at a time when clearly there's increased demand for public safety services. So from my perspective, we need a 5-year plan that gets us to where we need to be in terms of tools, training, and personnel. So that's the resource side of the equation. That also, that doesn't mean we're going to stop doing the kinds of things that the public expects us to do to build trust with the community around accountability and transparency. But we need to bring all of these pieces together in a way that makes sense for us to be able to particularly address this gun violence issue. This really exploded in the last year or so. It's a pandemic, and it needs to be addressed with adequate resources. And it's pretty obvious from where I sit that this particular moment, we do not have the adequate resources deployed on our streets in a proactive way. We're working with the police bureau. The chief did a good job of setting up the enhanced community safety team, which works on the backside of these incidents around investigation, followed through. I obviously strongly supported that. The chief has offered up the focused intervention team to do intervention and prevention from a policing perspective. Separately, the city council has supported significant new investments in community partners to work with those who are gang impacted or gun violence impacted. All of those things are the right steps, but it's pretty clear from my perspective, it's too little and it's not happening quickly enough. And so I will fight for additional resources for the police bureau. I will fight for more police officers, and I will fight for more tools and whatever other support the police bureau needs to be able to get its job done. And I want to work with the chief to specifically identify what's possible in the near term, given the current budget situation, and what's possible over the longer term, and set some longer term goals for where we want this police bureau to be in, say, 3, 4, 5 years from now.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Bridget Chavez is next up. Go ahead, Bridget.
Thank you. My question is for Chief Lavelle. Do we know if any of these shootings, particularly the one downtown, were gang related or retaliatory in nature? And also, is PPB still working with the FBI on curbing gun violence? I know you guys had the joint task force a few weeks ago or a month ago or so, but yeah, those are my questions.
Yes, we are still currently working with the FBI under our task force model to address gun violence, and that's been really beneficial for us. It's probably too early to say if this was gang related, but I'm hoping that investigators will learn more in the coming days and be able to figure out the nexus for this. But I think it's too early in this investigation to say that with any certainty.
Okay, and then I see in the chat, Jenny Young has a question. So Jenny, you can unmute and go ahead with your question.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. My first question is for the chief about the FBI. Were agents on the ground last night with detectives after this happened?
I'm not 100% sure about that. I know there have been times where we've had them out with our ECST folks, at times where we thought there were opportunities for heightened gun violence, and they've been good partners in that respect. But I can't say with any certainty if there were FBI agents there early this morning.
Okay. And then for Mayor Wheeler, this was a mass shooting in downtown Portland last night. And it comes like, I think, a year and maybe a week after GVRT was dissolved. Do you think the other versions of GVRT are working? And what do you say to people who are scared to come out of their homes and people who tell me they feel like they're living in Chicago?
Well, first of all, with regard to GVRT, I'm actually very pleased with the enhanced community safety team. I think that's a superior model as far as the investigative follow-through works, how the investigative follow-through works. The focused intervention team, I think, takes the best elements of GVRT, but also the accountability and transparency aspects that didn't exist previously. So I support the chief in the efforts he's making both around enhanced community safety team as well as FIT, the focused intervention team. With regard to what do I tell people, the truth, which is we have clearly a gun violence problem in our community. We have a homicide problem in our community, and the community should expect that we will have adequate resources, that's the tools, the training, and the personnel to be able to address the growing problem around gun violence and homicides in our community. But I also want to make clear to the public that does not mean we're turning our back on the kinds of reforms that people expect around accountability and transparency. It's not an either or, it's a both and. And so I am hoping to bring attention not only to my colleagues on the city council, but to the city at large about the important role that the Portland Police Bureau plays around public safety. They're not solely responsible for the safety of the community, but they are a critically important element. And right now, what I see is a police bureau that does not have the adequate number of personnel or all the resources that they need in order to be successful in their job. And I'm going to fight hard to make sure that they do.
All right, next up for question is Jack Forrest. After that, it'll be Aaron Mesh. Jack, go ahead with your question, sir.
Yes, thank you. This is a question for the chief. I understand that not all details are known right now, but to what extent do we know if this was a targeted or random shooting? And if it was a targeted shooting, was it for one particular person, multiple people? Guess just trying to understand more about what happened here.
Yeah, unfortunately, right now, it's hard to say, especially when you have an incident where, 7 people were struck by a gunfire, possibly additional, depending on who comes forward later, if there are any additional folks who left the scene. I think it's something that we'll work hard to find out, but it's one of those where it's very difficult to tell with the number of people who were gathered in that area. It's a very popular area late at night. There are food carts there and things of that nature. So it's very, very difficult to tell. We do believe that, some percentage of the people there were innocent bystanders too. So until we can do more investigating and figure that out, it's probably too early to say.
Okay, we'll have time for a few more questions. So if anybody else still has one, please feel free to raise your hand. Aaron Mesh from the chat. Go ahead, Aaron, with your question.
Thank you. So this is a question that could go to either the chief or the mayor. It's a question about the deployment of limited resources. I took a walk through the entertainment district last night, or what used to be called the entertainment district, around Voodoo Donuts and Dixie Tavern. As you point out, it's a very popular area. I saw very limited police presence in that area. A couple squad cars drove through over the course of about an hour and 15 minutes. No station police officers on the street. Why is that?
So I'll do an introduction and then I'll turn it over to Chief Lavelle. So now that some of the criminal destruction and violence that we saw late in the evenings has dissipated, that means there are now more officers that can be redeployed into the precincts. I've asked the chief and his leadership team to work to increase the visibility of walking patrols through high impact areas. That would include downtown. I'll let him speak specifically to Central Precinct, but I'll tell you, last night I was actually in the Montevilla neighborhood and I did see police officers walking on the street, going into the businesses, introducing themselves to people. So I know that is taking place, but obviously more of a proactive presence would be better than less. And Chief, I'll let you answer that question however you'd like.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, you know, for a city this size, we have a dedicated entertainment district detail and did for many years. With COVID last year, those entities down in what we used to call the enclosure in the entertainment district, those places weren't open. So we had the ability to shift resources from what would have been our entertainment district detail to other patrol functions in the city. Now that we're looking at reopening, we have to figure out how to redeploy an entertainment district presence amongst, from our existing call-taking patrol resources. We've lost just over 125 officers, sworn officers in the last year. So our staffing as far as the patrol functions down. We moved additional resources to patrol from our traffic division, K9 unit, and our narcotics unit to bolster that. And I think for us, it's really just finding out, okay, now that things are opening up, we want to have a presence back in the entertainment district, maybe close streets like we did at some point before with our partners. And it's just really a question of where do those resources now come from to do it. And it's a heavy ask for Central Precinct. They have a lot of things going on, but keeping people safe in the city is our main concern. So we'll figure out a way to have a presence there. But it's important for people to know that those resources come from somewhere else.
Chief, I'd also like to just maybe put a flag here around the clean and safe contract, which will be coming back to the Portland City Council in September. That will have, whether that passes or not through council will have implications for the number of officers that are supported downtown as well. And by the way, I support it.
All right, thank you, Mayor. A couple more questions. Zane Sparling has a follow-up. Zane, go ahead with your question.
All right, thank you for the opportunity. Mayor Wheeler, I do have a follow-up. I'm looking back at the budget that passed just in June, and that had some cuts to the Portland Police Bureau. My understanding is it was, you'd asked for these 5% cuts from the large bureaus, and you accepted most of those cuts from the police bureau. That didn't remove any officers already on patrol, but I mean, in some sense, a cut is a cut. Are you looking at the last budget or the budget from the year prior and, regretting some of the choices you made? Do you think they should have been done in different ways?
Well, actually, the reductions to the Portland Police Bureau were significantly less than we originally anticipated. The Portland Police Bureau is the largest general fund bureau, the largest user of discretionary dollars. I actually feel that working with the chief and with the command staff, we were able to, as much as possible, mitigate services on this, the reduction of services on the street. But with the resources we had available, there's no way we could let a bureau that spends almost $300 million a year out of that general fund pool completely immune from cuts. Obviously, I would have preferred that we didn't take any cuts to the Portland Police Bureau, but that was not possible with the resources we had available.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and our last question for the day is Megan Allison. Go ahead, Megan.
Sorry about that. This is for Mayor Wheeler. What is your action plan to tackle this issue on a long-term scale?
Which issue are you talking about, Megan?
The issue of gun violence here in Portland.
I think it's a threefold approach. Number one It requires intervention and prevention from the police bureau. That's why we're tooling up the focused intervention team. It requires good investigative follow through. That's why we have the enhanced community safety team. And I thought Chief Lavelle did a terrific job of standing that team up and expanding our investigative capacity for follow-up after these incidents take place to make sure each incident gets the attention it deserves. The third component is partnership, and that includes our Office of Violence Prevention working with community partners to work with those who are most impacted by gun violence to try to stop the spread of gun violence. And maybe I'll add a fourth here, which is working with our partners outside of the city of Portland, including the district attorney, who is responsible for prosecutions and ultimately holding people accountable, as well as our partnerships that some of you have indicated with our federal partners like the FBI. All of these things need to be brought to bear simultaneously. It's not, you can't just have one of these tools in place and adequately resourced. They all have to work together in tandem to be able to solve this problem over the long term.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. We'll wrap it up there. Of course, if anybody has any follow-up questions, you have our email contacts for both the mayor's team and the police bureau's team. So please feel free to send those our way, and we'll do our best to answer as we can. We'll sign off here. Thank you and have a pleasant afternoon.